Hey, what is up, everybody? Welcome to the Guilty as Charged podcast, coming to you live after a 3-week vacation. We had some time off, recharged the batteries, had a great time. We missed you guys, obviously, so excited to get back to it. We are in training camp month, a few short weeks away from training camp. Tyler and I and Alex this year are going to be at training camp, so we're super excited for that. Super excited to have like normal football content back in the realm of talking about Chargers football. So should be a ton of fun. Excited to get down there. Excited for today's show with my guy Tyler. Tyler, what's up, man? How you doing tonight?
Oh, I'm doing fantastic. It's nice to be back. I had to readjust things. I didn't know where I sit, or which light I turn on, or how I do any of this. So
yeah,
excited to be back. It's been a minute. I did absolutely nothing, which was entirely the point.
Yeah.
We considered coming back last week, but then nothing really was happening. And so we're just yeah, we'll do another week, which was nice. Skipping that part of June. Now we're in July. We've got training camp coming up. That was nice. So happy to be back. Happy to see everyone in the chat already. Leave a like, leave a comment, subscribe if you haven't already. Leave a like. And if you don't, Kristen Cole's going to win the Game of Thrones by the end of the House of the Dragon. We got to kill this guy. So hit like.
Yeah, but leave that individual alone. He's just an actor portraying a character. The character just happens to be super annoying and one of my least favorite characters in the Game of Thrones universe. But, you know, it wouldn't be our show if we didn't talk about stuff. But I have loved this season of Game of Thrones. House of the Dragon. It feels like I'm watching actual Game of Thrones. And so I've loved what they've done so far. Excited to see next week's episode. I'm not going to spoil anything, but they've been kind of setting up for episode 4 to be a big bad episode, and I can't wait to watch it.
Yeah, should be good. I watched Game of Thrones the whole, because what else you do in the summer as a teacher? I watched all 8 seasons of Game of Thrones, and nice. Boy, did that last season still absolutely. So getting back to act feeling like you're in Game of Thrones feels nice. Some good writing, some good acting.
Yeah, definitely. I've thought about rewatching it several times, and every time I'm just like, season 8, man. I don't know, but it is what it is. So this is a football podcast, obviously, but we like to talk about some things that we enjoy watching and things like that. And for everybody who gets mad at it, Mina Kimes does the same thing. Every single time she has a new guest on, she always talks about content that her and her guests are consuming and everything like that. And she's like a real professional. So shout out to Mina.
Yeah, we're just fake professionals. So
but we are kicking off the training camp ramp-up period by talking about the offensive players on the bubble. So this is going to be a 2-part series today and tomorrow. We're specifically focusing in on players who have the best chance of making it or are just going to be the players who missed out. So we're not going to spend a ton of time talking about Zach Heins or Jalen Gill type of player. Unfortunately, if you're a big fan of those guys, we just feel like that's not the kind of player that we're talking about. So for this particular exercise, I put Donald Parham in the thumbnail. That's kind of the player that we're really focusing in on, Foster Sarell, that type. We'll get in more here in a minute, but it's guys who could make the roster, could get cut, any kind of realm in between. It's not like the guys that are for sure not making the roster. So that's who we're focusing in on today. Before we get started, of course, today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks. NBA Finals are over, Stanley Cup is over, but you still got WNBA games, golf tournaments, anything that you want to get some skin in the game. There's an NBA Summer League is going to be starting in the next few weeks here. So Prize Picks has you guys covered in any kind of way you want to get the skin in the game. It's the best way to consume daily fantasy sports. Super easy. All you'd have to do is select 4 or 5 different players and click more or less, and it could be any kind of statistic. So it's a great way to use daily fantasy. You can go to prizepicks.com/guilty for a deposit match up to $100. All right, Tyler, we're going to go position by position here. Did you have a position that maybe was more difficult for you to kind of parse through? You're nodding profusely over here. What is that position? And we'll start there.
Tight end / fullback. This whole grouping feels like a complete look. There's 2 guys. Okay, let's just start with the locks.
Yeah,
Will Dissly, obviously by contract as well, and then Hayden Hurst. Those 2 are locks. I agree with your questioning of Donald Parham's overall security. To me, I think he falls in kind of that in-between category between a lock and a bubble guy. But
Mhm.
I think the more he doesn't practice and the more any kind of injuries or whatever it is potentially mount for him, he moves closer to that bubble territory. Now, is there another guy on the roster who's really as quote unquote proven with the same kind of EPA per target as Parham right now, waiting in the wings? No. So I ultimately think he's going to be safe, but I'm glad you put him in the thumbnail because I think it's more than just like, ooh, this is an interesting conversation. Let's throw some buzz out there. I
Yeah.
genuinely believe this is like a conversation worth having because as much as I like Donald Parham, it's just been a long history of injuries and training camp injuries. Every training camp, there's a video of Donald Parham leaving because he's hurt. No fault of his own, but multiple concussions during the season, other injuries that just make him miss some time during games. So
Yeah.
it's a tricky situation. So right now, even though last year the tight end room was worse, I felt like we knew more locks to
Yeah.
make the roster for several reasons. This year it feels like two, and then I'm pretty sure Donald Parham, and then it's anybody's game after that. And that's before we even get to fullbacks, which is a whole other thing.
Yeah. Donald Parham's case, I think, is the right place to start here because it's kind of an under the radar storyline of his stock watch. And I know, he's not necessarily a super household name, but at the same time, the Chargers did sign him to a 2-year contract last offseason. And when he was on the field, he was super productive. Like, I've been watching some of these games back from last season, studying different kind of players here and there. And when the Chargers were without Josh Palmer and Mike Williams, Donald Parham was often the second target behind Keenan Allen last year. And there's just like a level of trust between Justin Herbert and Donald Parham that I think could sway things quite a bit. But at the same time, the injuries it's such a big concern because you just don't know. Like he deals with so many soft tissue injuries, which is not uncommon. I mean, he's a 6'8" freak athlete for his size, and his body just does not hold up like some of these other positions do. So it's an availability question, and I think it's also kind of like a roster construction question because what do they value at the tight end position? Because as receivers, I think Hayden Hurst and Donald Parham are a little bit redundant. There is some similar skill sets there in terms of their ability to get vertical and control the middle of the field. Donald Parham, I think, is much more athletic and creates more yards after the catch. But that question, the injury question, I think is enough for me to be like, hey, like there's a good chance that they just value something else. Stone Smartt is a pure big slot receiver. Maybe that's the kind of balance they like versus having Donald Parham, who's a little bit redundant with Hayden Hurst. So it's an underrated storyline. There's a lot of like key position battles being thrown out there, and we're going to do the same kind of thing. But Donald Parham's candidacy is one of the more interesting storylines to me because when he's healthy, he's one of their most explosive weapons on the team, period. It's a big if, and we don't know like roster construction, how they're going to view him.
Right. I don't, it's not a perfect comparison, but it almost feels Denario Alexander, where when the ball's like thrown to him and the ball's in his hands, touchdown, first downs, you name it, like great stuff. And then it's just injuries. He had more ACL tears, like season ending stuff. So it's a little bit different, but it kind of reminds me of like talent versus availability issue.
Yeah.
And ultimately, at some point, the available guys are going to have that nod, potentially ahead of Parham. But I do believe he's like, I'll put him in lock for now. So I think there are the three tight ends that make it. And we can talk about the rest of these guys now.
Yeah, I do think he is a better football player than a Stone Smartt, than the undrafted free agent tight ends. It's just like if he misses time in training camp and Stone Smart's there every day and he's working and he's getting better, as Jim Harbaugh has said, competitors welcome. Like that is going to be an advantage for some guys. It's just the unfortunate reality of where this team is at. So otherwise, we put on the bubble here fullback / tight end. So I think you have to talk about Ben Mason. I saw somebody respond to your tweet that they're a huge Ben Mason fan, even though he's played one regular season snap. I get it. It's fine. It's fun. And then you have Luke Benson and Zach Heins and Stone Smartt. Of that group, we talked a bit on the undrafted episode a while back about Luke Benson. But of that group, who would you say has the best chance of making the roster?
Is this including Ben Mason?
Yeah.
I'm going to say Ben Mason for now. I think you bring him over for a particular reason. The familiarity was there. We connected the dots before they even signed him. They signed him. Looking at Greg Roman's history of using fullbacks, I mean, they use fullbacks quite a bit. And that's like beyond just like Patrick Ricard with the Ravens, where you're going to use them like no matter what. With the 49ers, it was Bruce Miller, over 400 snaps per season. With the Bills, it was Jerome Felton, a little bit less, only 2 years, but about 300 snaps per season. So they're going to use a fullback. And it seems like Ben Mason is that guy. The only obvious holdup is what you've just said, which is that he's played one snap. One regular season snap. So it's not like they picked up Derek Watt. And then it's like, yeah, sure, that's obviously the fullback or whatever. Even Xander Horvath at this point has played more snaps, but I don't know why they all go to the Steelers if you're a fullback, but good for you. So
the chosen one did not go to the Steelers. We know that.
Yeah, great.
If you know, you know.
No comment. All right. So I think Ben Mason does have the leg up there. It sounds like he's been playing more as the primary fullback. How much they use him, I think, is the story. But I have to give it to Ben Mason for now because I think new regimes want their guys. They did sign him. I don't put a ton of stock into his snaps because there basically are none. But ultimately, I think it's Ben Mason. And if I had to give it to somebody else, then it would be Luke Benson.
Yeah, I think that's fair. We're not at minicamp, and we'll see at training camp kind of how this gets diced out. But essentially, from what we can gather from like pictures and reporting from Daniel Popper and Chris Rim and those guys, and messaging ourselves like around the facility, Ben Mason is like the starter, and then they'll work in like Will Dissly has played some fullback. Hayden Hurst has played some fullback. Luke Benson has played fullback. So in terms of like fullback, it's Mason and then it's Benson from what we can gather right now. Luke Benson is an undrafted free agent. He is a young rookie, so there is a chance that they're just kind of trying to work him in a bit. But it does sound like, at least right now, that Ben Mason is the starting fullback. How much that ultimately matters, we'll see, right? Like we'll see if they just end up deciding to roll with 4 tight ends and figure it out with Will Dissly and maybe Hayden Hurst can play some fullback, maybe Donald Parham can play some fullback. You just kind of figure it out. I think I lean towards Mason making it, but I am on the fence a bit because they didn't bring in any like legitimate competition either. So maybe that kind of lends itself towards them being willing to just kind of workshop it and then next year go out and draft a fullback or sign a different fullback or something like that.
Yeah, that was a great point you mentioned about them mix and matching with Dissly and other tight ends to be kind of that fullback in certain scenarios for them. So do you even need a true fullback in that sense? Not necessarily. So in that case, like maybe that does lean more Luke Benson. So it's a tricky one. And I'm curious how much run they're going to get in the preseason. What's the pecking order there? Will these guys be able to show what they can do? Yeah. If they get to the preseason, I could see Benson being kind of a standout just because of his athleticism and what he can do. It kind of just like watching him at Georgia Tech just feels like what the Ravens would like to do with some of their tight ends. So he kind of checks both boxes. Like, okay, you don't need a pure fullback, but I can also be a tight end. And so I think that helps him a lot here too. I guess same can be said of Ben Mason. So down to them too. I'll take Benson as the lead right now, but Benson is definitely my other guy.
Yeah, and I think the special teams aspect there is super crucial because we know that Ryan Ficking is going to have influence about his special teams guys making the roster or not. And if he feels like Luke Benson is more prone to special teams than Ben Mason, and this new kickoff rule, like we have no idea what kind of impact this new kickoff rule is going to play on roster construction. But that could lend itself more towards somebody like Benson, who's more of a taller, longer, athlete than somebody like Ben Mason is, and then they'll figure out fullback later on. Okay, so let's pivot over here to running back. There was some interesting discussion on social media today because of the contracts that Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins have. Who did you have at running back on the bubble, and who do you have as a lock? Let's start with the locks there first.
Yeah, so this one is just a kind of easy cut and dry one for me. So locks are Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins, Kamani Vidal. Those 3 are the locks. Gus Edwards being the most lock. Dobbins, I guess like there's maybe a health question. So if he's super unhealthy or something happens, but we're gonna assume he's fine. Lock there.
Yeah.
Vidal's a lock. Those three are the locks. And there's no undrafted free agent running backs here, at least no current ones. They didn't draft a running back outside of Vidal, so I think it's just those three, and everybody else is a bubble guy.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. There were some people online today saying like, "Oh, Vidal, like he could easily get cut," and it's like, well,
Why?
They just drafted him. It's not like they have a ton of great running back options, you know. So it's, to me, Vidal is more likely to be like the RB1 of the team than he is to get cut. I don't think he's going to be the RB1, but like, you know what I mean? I think it's more like,
yeah, okay,
sure, getting cut. To me, those three are locks. I think the only way that J.K. Dobbins doesn't make the roster is if he gets injured again.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think there is some concern more than people are kind of letting on about his injuries and what kind of ceiling he has left. But I think if he is healthy through the preseason, I think he's making it. The other thing here is like, if they're keeping a fullback, you can't keep 4 running backs and a fullback. Like that roster construction.
Oh, Telesco would disagree with you on that one. Are you sure about that?
I mean, this team potentially has 7 wide receivers they need to keep and all this stuff. So I guess anything is possible. That's fair. But yeah, I think Isaiah Spiller, Elijah Dotson, they're on the bubble. And then there's like Jarrett Patterson, who they signed to futures contract. I don't think he's on the bubble. I think he's firmly on the outside. What do you make of the Spiller Dotson debate? Who would you have as the better chance of making it there?
Yeah, that's obviously a tricky one there. I'm curious what the situation with Gus Edwards is as it unfolds during training camp, because he is hurt, and they said that they think he'd be ready by training camp. He should be ready by training camp.
Yeah.
Not 100% sure until I see him out there and he's in full. And even playing or taking snaps or whatever. Not sure how much preseason work he'll get, but he is hurt. And so I am curious what kind of body type they'd lean towards, because you have Dotson at 202 pounds, Spiller at about 217 or 213, I believe. No, 217, according to their RAS. Whether that's changed or not, I have no idea. It sounds like Spiller was supposed to be getting bigger. But let's say he's 217. I think maybe they'd prefer that size, especially if Edwards is hurt. Not that he's as big as Gus Edwards. Gus Edwards is kind of his own thing. But they might prefer him there, especially if also his Dobbins is hurt. Vidal is not very tall, but even he's 213, I believe, or 212. So they might prefer somebody a bit heavier to stick around. It does also, like, they do pick up $400,000, which isn't a ton, but $400,000 in dead cap if they cut Spiller. So with that, with the fact that he was a draft pick at some point, and maybe Ortiz or Alexander or somebody also had some priors about him, you know, maybe they thought he was pretty good too. I don't know. I think he sticks around, but ultimately, I guess this call, I don't think either make it, first off. Yeah. If I had to pick, I think it's Spiller, but ultimately, I think it comes down to Ficken's decision here, which could mean Dotson. So I just think both don't make it.
Yeah.
But I'm just going to lean Spiller because there's at least a dead money aspect of that. There's a more weight aspect of that. Everything but the football side of things. Yeah,
I think if Ficken had his choice, I think it would be Dotson. I think that's a big reason why Dotson stayed on the roster last year, is his ability to play special teams. And so with the new kickoff rule, maybe Dotson is a better kickoff returner than Darius Davis. I don't know. Like, we have to see this thing, play out before we actually, can say that kind of thing. I think if Gus Edwards is not healthy, Isaiah Spiller definitely has a leg up over Elijah Dotson, because stylistically Spiller just makes more sense. Like, even though he should be a physical back, but he's not. I actually like him better like on the perimeter than I do in between the tackles. But theoretically, Isaiah Spiller is a bigger back. So I think that is a fair point. I do tend to agree. I think this is pretty cut and dry. It's unfortunate, you see these players get drafted and you talk yourself into them and they show some promise and you want to root for them. But Isaiah Spiller was not drafted by this regime. Isaiah Spiller, just to me, has not shown enough development and doesn't play special teams, actively does not play special teams. So it's unfortunate. He has to basically like be better and healthier than Gus Edwards to make the team, in my opinion. I think that's really his only way where he can make this roster. Which I don't know if that's all that likely. So that's the running back position. Any final thoughts there before we move on?
No, but we kind of mentioned the fullback aspect. I think if they keep a fullback, 3 running backs, 1 fullback. I don't see why they'd keep 4 running backs and a fullback, but they do like to run it.
They do like to run it. It is very true. I do think we could, if Gus Edwards is not healthy and this injury situation is worse, I think we could see them sign a running back, off the street and have some insurance there. So that definitely is something to keep an eye on. All right, let's go to the offensive line here. Obviously, locks. We have the starting 5: Rashawn Slater, Zion Johnson, who the 2 of them were seen pulling trucks at offensive line masterminds this past weekend. So shout out to them. I know everybody kind of hates Zion right now, but dude is a freak of nature from an athletic standpoint, and Rashawn is as well. So there you go. Bradley Bozeman is a lock. Obviously, Trey Pipkins, who's the starting right guard, as we talked about on our previous episode, is a lock. And then Mr. Joe Alt is a roster lock. In terms of the backups, Tyler, who would you say is a roster lock and who would you say is on the bubble?
Yeah, I think that because Jamari was given any chance to start and he's technically at least 4 position player, I think should be considered a lock. And then Heins is a lock because he's the backup center. Like there's no other real backup center. Yeah. So I think he's a lock. McFadden should be a lock, but he's not their guy, day 3 guy. Maybe there's just some redundancy issues there or concerns there, especially because Jamari's a backup now. And so, yeah, he should be a lock, but I think Sawyer and Heins are the true locks. I could see them finding maybe a UDFA over McFadden, but I don't really buy that too much.
Yeah, I would agree. Locks, I would say those 3. I mean, even McFadden, I think the idea behind, because right now they have not moved McFadden positions and Sawyer has only played right guard. I think that's very intentional because you want like stylistic, comparisons. So if anything happens to Zion, McFadden's like athletically the same kind of profile. Mm-hmm. And then if anything happens to Trey, Jamari's like the same kind of athletic profile. So I think that's very intentional. Brendan Heins being the unquestioned backup center is one of the kind of biggest surprises of the offseason for me. Yep. But until they bring in somebody else, he's a lock. Like he is the only person who has center experience in the NFL, who has been able to show what he likes. And Heins kind of fits the Ravens offensive line profile to a T. Like they have had so many guys like him. Patrick McCarry has made a very long NFL career for the Baltimore Ravens because of that profile. So those are the 3 locks. I think the players who, for me, are like the biggest question marks in terms of making it or not making it are the 2 backup tackles. That's Foster Sarell and Alex Leatherwood. And I think that comes down to, do they want to keep 10 offensive linemen? This is a team that loves offensive linemen. They think they're an offensive line factory. They think offensive linemen are weapons on the offensive side of the football. I would not be shocked if they keep 10 offensive linemen, as crazy as that sounds. But at the same time, we know what Alex Leatherwood and the question marks that he brings to the table. We have not seen a ton of great play from Foster Sarell out at offensive tackle, but he continues to work hard. He was a former Stanford Cardinal, former 5-star offensive lineman, and those things potentially might matter a bit to a former Stanford head coach. What do you make of the Foster Sarell and Alex Leatherwood debate here?
Ooh, okay. I have a coin here, and I'm gonna flip it. Honestly, I really don't know. Like, I genuinely need to see these guys. Like, Sarell is maybe a bit of a default because he's, I guess, a pure tackle. But I got to see Leatherwood play. I got to see him play in the preseason. With that said, I think I will lean towards, and this might be something we discuss even on defense too, I will lean towards the guy you brought in being the guy that gets the edge. I will lean towards the Regine guy getting the nod over the former Regine guy. Like, you've kind of seen Foster Sarell. Maybe you don't know as much about Alex Leatherwood currently, and they might want to make him like a multi, or he's on a 1-year deal, but they'll probably keep him next year if he's half decent. you want to see what you maybe have in Leatherwood. Can you restore that career? I think there's something about that. So I will lean towards Leatherwood unless they tried the tackle thing out. They say, never mind, well, he's just a guard. In that case, he's out.
Yeah.
I don't think he makes the roster at all over someone like McFadden. But if they do view him as a pure tackle, I think he's going to have the edge over Sarell.
Yeah, I'm curious ultimately like how much this potential position battle like actually matters in terms of the swing tackle spot, because it feels like if anything happens to Rashawn or Alt, they would just move Trey over to one of those spots and bring in Jamari, or maybe Jamari is one of the swing tackles. But I think the versatility of the backups I think is super crucial, and I think you bring up a great point of they brought in Alex Leatherwood. Well, Alex Leatherwood can play tackle and guard. Like, we haven't seen it played at a super high level, but he's played it. He's played both sides of offensive tackle in college. He was a better offensive tackle in college than Foster Sarell was. Not that matters a whole lot now that they're in the NFL, but you flipped a coin. I think that's totally fair. I would give a slight edge to Alex Leatherwood just because of the thing that you mentioned, and then his positional versatility. But I do think there is a good chance that they actually keep 10. Like, I do think that this is a backup offensive line unit that they would be interested in developing throughout the year and seeing how they can grow together. I was looking at our lads from the 49ers days. They kept 9 every year except for one. One year they did keep 10. So the 49ers did keep 10 one season. I think that was because Mike Iupati was a bit injured, and so they could have wanted some insurance and things like that. But they always kept at least 9, and the Ravens have kind of, for the most part, kept 9 as long as they've had 9 guys to merit that selection. So I think they'll keep 9, and I think of that group, I think Alex Leatherwood has a slight edge right now. Again, it's July 1st. We'll see once they get pads on, get in preseason games, but it feels like the versatility of Alex Leatherwood could give him an edge.
So if they have the 5 starters, the 3 interior backups we mentioned in McFadden, Heins, and Sawyer, let's say a 9th guy let's say Alex Leatherwood is the 9th guy.
Yeah.
Do you think one of the UDFAs would have a shot over Sarell, or do you think it's just kind of they're going to go with the
point? Yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to get into next with this group. So up until they signed Alex Leatherwood, Carson Barnhart was the right guard, working with the second team. They have Tyler McClellan and Tyler Smith as kind of like the backup tackles. And then Brent Lang, Bucky Williams are like their swing interior guys. Both of them can play center. Both of them can play guard. And then obviously Willis Patrick there. So if you're talking about Barnhart versus Foster Sarell, maybe I think that might be the only guy I would say has a chance to beat him out, just because like roster construction wise, I don't know, you want to keep 4 backup interior offensive linemen. That's a bit of an ask for me, but I would say Barnhart would be kind of the choice for me, and just not because I think he's any good. Like, I do think he was kind of bad on tape, but Michigan, like, he was unquestioned backup right guard in mini camp, so I think there is some chance that he is on the bubble and the other guys are kind of just on the outside looking in.
Yeah, I agree. Unless one of them can play center. If Willis Patrick's a heck of a third center, then there's a chance there, because I don't think you want to just have the 2 centers. Be like, yeah, there we go. That'll be our season.
Yeah.
So we'll see. But yeah, based on snaps from pictures from not training camp or the preseason, we'll go with Barnhart there.
Yeah. So to recap the offensive line, we believe the 5 starters are locks, and then the 3 backup interior guys, Jordan McFadden, Brandon Heins, and Jamari Sawyer are also locks. And then the bubble really is Foster Sarell, Alex Leatherwood, and Carson Barnhart. Any final thoughts there, Tyler, before you move on to wide receivers?
No, that's perfect. I think 9's the max. 9 sounds good. Wouldn't surprise me if it's a 10, I guess, but 9 feels like the max.
Yeah, I tend to agree. All right, wide receiver. Usually the position group we probably would start with. I think there's a lot of question marks here, a lot of interesting, position battles here. I think we should start with the Brendan Rice conversation.
Yeah, let's do it.
So there's a lot of people out there, obviously, that think Brendan Rice is a roster lock. Obviously, the Chargers did draft him. A lot of draft pundits felt like he was underdrafted. I wasn't super high on him coming out, but I do agree he was underdrafted. So what do you make of his stock right now? We haven't heard a ton of buzz. We haven't heard a ton of specific roles that he might have. There was a bit from Greg Roman's mic'd up where he talked about a specific route concept that Brendan Rice ran really well. They wanted to get him in with the first team offense. So there is that. That is, I think, is a positive for Brendan Rice. But would you consider him a lock, or would you consider him on the bubble?
That's a great question. And I really wrestled with that one. Then, of course, Cornelius Johnson, we'll talk about in a bit. Like, the first part of the equation is how many receivers do they keep? And right now, like, I think we feel good at about 5 they're going to keep. Then it comes down to, 6 or 7. I do believe Brendan Rice is a lock. Of course, there's a 7th round status, which isn't exactly guaranteeing you a spot. But they've come out and said that he was like a round 3-4, like mid-round kind of guy to them. And he's just kind of lucky. They're just kind of lucky that he fell. I think that there's some clear like popularity of the player that maybe is an incentive to keep him.
Sure.
I've heard, not from a Chargers team organization, but I've heard he interviews extremely well. Like one of the best interviews of anybody in this class. So I think I'm sure he made an impression on the Chargers. And then I had heard that he fell because of medicals. I don't know anything about it other than that word, but that could be why he fell. So I think that they believe in him more and his film and everything more than that 7th round draft status. And so I think that he is inevitably going to be a lock. And it just comes down to like the 7th wide receiver to me.
Yeah, I would say I lean towards him being a lock as well. I think them deciding to draft him, very different positions, but it had a kind of similar feel to like the Chargers drafting Jamari, where it's just like, yeah, there's some question marks, but like we just really love this guy on film and we're just going to take a chance on him. So it did kind of feel like that kind of conversation. A small part of me does wonder if they only keep 5, just sheer roster construction does not merit them keeping 6 wide receivers. If they keep 10 offensive linemen, do they keep 6 defensive tackles? Do they keep 6? Do they keep 6 linebackers? It's just you can't keep everybody, unfortunately. But I do lean towards him being a lock. I think his play is going to, show up more in the preseason than somebody like a Cornelius Johnson or some of these other undrafted free agent wide receivers. I just think he's going to have more of a connection with Easton Stick. He's going to have more of a true like number 1 role with the backup offense. So I think he's going, if he's not a lock now, I think he's going to cement himself as a lock later on. And part of the whole constructing a 53-man roster is figuring out if any of these guys, if you cut them, would they get sniped up on the waiver wire? And I think Brendan Rice absolutely would get scooped up on the waiver wire from another team if he were cut. So I think that is something that the Chargers are and will have to consider for his case in particular.
Yeah, I'm curious if as of the draft or leading right up to the draft, maybe there was some sort of injury concern or some flag that popped up. Well, now we're several months past that. By the time you cut him and it's a non-injury thing, if that injury concern is alleviated and they just cut him because they needed a roster spot for another tackle or whatever, then yeah, I'm sure another team would absolutely pick him up.
Yeah. So any of the main 5, I think we can safely say that they are locks. Obviously, you're talking about Josh Palmer, Ladd McConkey, Quentin Johnston, Darius Davis, and DJ Chark. So we would have Brendan Rice being a lock there as well. Is there any chance you see this team keeping 7 wide receivers and also keeping Cornelius Johnson here?
Yes, totally. I think they do. I think they're going to keep 7. Or I think they'll at least keep Brendan Rice and Cornelius Johnson. Maybe there's something DJ Chark doesn't work out. I don't know. But I think they're going to keep those 2 guys. So let's say they keep 7. And I think it's not necessarily like even a this year thing. I just think it's a buy low in a time of uncertainty where you're just going to try to invest as much as you can now. And hopefully that stock continues to grow in the players that you invest in, so that by the time you get to this spot next year, you might have some questions answered. Because look, Quentin Johnston might not work out. DJ Chark might not be the same player. Josh Palmer is a free agent next year. technically Darius Davis is not a pure receiver for you. So technically he doesn't really count. And Len McConkey, you feel pretty good about. I think he's obviously the most locked guy, but who knows, right? Injury concerns, you name it. Who knows? So I think you just try to mine and keep investing in these guys and hold on to them. Now, if they feel that Cornelius Johnson can be cut and stashed, okay, then I could see why he would like extract on the practice squad. I get it. But I genuinely do believe they're going to try to keep 7, which it feels so unlike them. I almost feel like it'd make more sense. Like if you told me they're keeping 5 receivers, like, oh yeah, that makes more sense than 7. But I just feel like this position is too up in the air, too much regime change, too much change next year, too much disappointment in some of their current receivers. Because I don't want to look at a spot where, okay, Palmer has another mid-season injury. Quentin Johnston's not working out. DJ Chark's not him. And suddenly it's like, oh, well, we have to go find somebody now. Like, I really think they're going to try to hold on to these guys because they have to keep mining this position.
Yeah, I'm just this is definitely the position that I think is most up in the air, just like 1 through 7, basically. I do think that we have to label Cornelius Johnson as a bubble player until we kind of see what their plan is and see, how this thing unfolds in the in training camp. But I think there is definitely a good chance that they keep him. Again, Ryan Ficken's influence here is definitely going to play a role. And if you keep a guy like Cornelius Johnson, he has a very high special teams profile. He played a lot of special team snaps at Michigan. He's an athletic freak. He blocks well. He's like the perfect special teams wide receiver, if we're being 100%. Completely honest. So if Ryan Ficken wants to keep him around, then Ryan Ficken can do whatever he wants. Ryan Ficken can ask for anything in his contract, and I think the Chargers would consider it. So I think there definitely is a chance, but until we see that, I think he is, on the bubble. You bringing up an interesting point there about like the 5.
Mm-hmm.
If you had to,
I hate you for asking me to what you're about. Go for it.
I think we have to label them as a lock, but I think there is a world where part of keeping 7 is like, hey, like, what if we can get, a 5th round pick at the trade deadline for Josh Palmer or DJ Chark? And like, hey, what if somebody needs like a big physical, veteran X receiver at training camp because so-and-so got hurt? Like what if the Detroit Lions call the Chargers up and say, hey, we want our guy DJ Chark back? Like, the bone here. I don't know. Sure. Like,
I get you.
I think there is an outside chance that Palmer or Chark are kind of, trade bait at some point in the next few months.
Ooh, I don't disagree. I think that would be Palmer. So that's tricky, and it's kind of the same conversation we had about Keenan Allen. On the one hand, probably your best receiver, at least right now. He should be given the benefit of the doubt. Yeah. On the other hand, Keenan was worth the most. So it's like, okay, better receiver, but also worth the most. The Palmer thing, I think, will just depend on where they are at the end or that trade deadline part of the season. If they stink and they're losing games, yes, Palmer will be gone because he's probably not a part of their plans moving forward. Chark, I don't see them trading because if he's hitting and getting his incentives and all's good, you just keep him and probably just let him walk in free agency next year or whatever. So, yeah, I could see Palmer has enough value that I think he's tradable, but I think they're going to keep the group that they have. But I don't know. It's tricky. Unfortunately, Quentin Johnston does not have much trade value.
No, Quentin has a lot of work to do to recoup that trade value, if any. So I think they'll keep the group as is. I just think it's worth mentioning that like this team is in a roster reconstruction phase and they did not draft Joshua Palmer. So, maybe like you mentioned earlier, the guys that they brought in DJ Chark. Maybe that has more value than a Josh Palmer for them, and they can kind of figure out the rest there. But 6 roster locks at wide receiver, potentially a 7th. That's going to be one of the more interesting things to see at training camp. Not even just like roster construction. Like we are so used to, as Chargers fans, Keenan Allen's wide receiver 1. You have Tyrell Williams, Mike Williams, wide receiver 2, like clear cut, concrete. this year, like everything is up for grabs at the wide receiver position, and I have no idea who's going to be, in the pecking order where. I feel like Josh Palmer should be the wide receiver 1 until proven otherwise, but outside of that, man, like I just have no idea. Like I just need to see it at training camp and see who's getting the Justin Herbert love and who's showing up in the preseason. It's going to be a lot of fun. There was a question earlier about who plays in the preseason. I think all of them play in the preseason. I think this is a room where they really have to see them play on the field, in-game action, and sort out the pecking order as much as they can.
Yeah, they have to. It's a series, it's a quarter, fine. But Herbert needs to get out there with a starting 3 or a duo or a mild rotation of 4 to see who's really about it this year. Obviously, the Chargers want to win this year. Of course, they said they want to win. They want to be competitive, right. But like you got to figure out what you also need for the future as well. Who of these guys is going to be your guy?
Yeah, 100%. All right, Tyler, last thing for me, I think, is there any dark horse offensive player that you think could work their way into being a bubble player or onto the roster?
I think so. This would obviously, they're not keeping 8 of these guys, but I think there's some level of, hey, we should have a veteran in the room in Simi Fehoko. I think there's a small chance, a very, very small chance. I don't know how much special teams he played with Ryan Fickinson. Maybe I would change my mind. But I think there's a small chance, given the rookiness and rawness of this wide receiver core, that maybe, I guess DJ Chark applies, but maybe Simi Fehoko could make it. Otherwise, I don't know. I don't know if any of these UDFA wide receivers is going to be that guy. If there was a running back, a UDFA running back, probably that guy. But otherwise, I think offensive line is now just kind of set with the guys we talked about. I think tight end, fullback is kind of set with the guys we talked about. Running back is those 3, and I think that's it. So I think maybe Simi Fehoko, but I don't know. He torched Gilman on one play, and the internet went freaking wild. I don't know if you saw that, but because Gilman sucks, and Fehoko is going to have Jerry Rice numbers. But maybe him.
Yeah, that wide receiver feels right. Maybe a Jalen Gill type can just like have an awesome training camp or something like that. A lot of that does depend on which quarterback is throwing them the football, though, as we've kind of discovered throughout the last few seasons. So it's going to be interesting. Like you mentioned, I think a lot of these positions are cut and dry. We obviously did not talk about quarterback, which is very, very cut and dry. It's Herbert and it's Stick, and I don't think there's really any kind of conversation beyond that, as much as people want to make the Max Duggan thing happen. Tyler, any final thoughts before we head out tonight?
We'll definitely revisit that quarterback conversation as we do every year. Like, they're not keeping 3. They're not keeping 3. They're not keeping 3. They keep 3. Different regime, though, so we'll see.
Yeah, that's fair. They didn't draft Max Duggan. I also think Max Duggan is just like not getting any reps at minicamp. So I think they're kind of telling us what they think there. All right. So this has been a fun episode back into the swing of things. We're going to have the defensive side of the ball tomorrow. We're not going to be podcasting on Thursday. It is the 4th of July. So hopefully you guys have a great time celebrating, a safe time celebrating as always. And then we'll be back to our normal 3-day schedule next week. And then it's full steam ahead towards training camp. So appreciate you guys for tuning in. As Tyler said earlier, make sure you like, subscribe, comment, review. All that stuff does continue to help grow the show. Make sure and join our Patreon pages, YouTube memberships, get in the Discord. That's always fun times. The Discord has been ablaze with NBA free agency stuff recently. So make sure and get in there. It's a good time. All right, guys, that's going to do it for us tonight. We'll see you tomorrow. As always, Bolt up.